And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our platform where we are advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism throughout the state of Louisiana, advancing the cause of good constitutional candidates, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, for spending part of your day with us. Today, we will be continuing the endorsement series with another Louisiana First candidate, a true gentleman and patriot, John Raymond. And he is running for state rep in District 104. But first, let's take a look at the scripture of the day before we meet him. Today's scripture is Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, and it says, "Keep your thoughts continually fixed on all that is authentic and real, honorable and admirable, beautiful and respectful, pure and holy, merciful and kind, and fasten your thoughts on every glorious work of God, praising Him always." And as I was reading that, I was really struck by that phrase, keep your mind fixed on all that is authentic and real. There's so much that's fake out there that's constantly being thrown in our faces, reality. And it's so important to stay moored to what is real. And I think, this is an instruction on how we can keep our hearts right. And it's by living in the awe of the Lord and what He's doing in our lives and our world, and by staying in a posture of continual praise. And I think that if we can discipline our mind and our heart to stay focused on Him and the reality of Him and truth, then we won't get drawn off track. We won't find ourselves looking up and saying, oh my gosh, I got so distracted. And look, here I am 3 miles away from where I meant to be, wasting time and energy. So yeah, just maybe an encouragement today that if we're continually refilling ourselves with the presence and the goodness of the Lord, then it'll be like He's a home base for us to come back to. And this is something that, as we fasten our thoughts on every glorious work, as it says, it's not necessarily something that we ever really achieve, but it's a point that we can continually point back to and aim for.
Absolutely. Distractions are everywhere, Danielle. It's amazing how everywhere you turn, there is something that can distract us from the power of God, that can distract us from the work that we're trying to do. A daily discipline of prayer, a daily discipline of trying to refocus on God and always acknowledging His presence and His work in our lives just helps to sustain us on a daily basis. So what a powerful scripture. As you said a few minutes ago, we are blessed this morning and privileged to have John Raymond with us today, who is running for state representative over in St. Tammany, District 104. Looking forward to talking with him this morning. Welcome to the show, John. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris and Danielle. I love you guys so much and all the work that you guys do at LeCag. What a great organization. I pray for you guys continually, and you're really doing a wonderful job. And Danielle, I have to say thank you for that devotion, because it's so pertinent, especially today. We're in the age of information overload. And so often it's not a matter of what we shouldn't listen to as much as it is as it's good or it's God. And we have to make sure it's like, okay, we're not going to listen to the bad, but sometimes those distractions that Chris was talking about could even be good things, but they're just not the best things. And they're not what God wants us to put our minds on. So it really does take, as Chris mentioned, that daily prayer, that daily time in God's word to make sure that the Holy Spirit sifts through all of that other stuff, and we just focus on what the Lord wants us to focus on. So that means a lot to me, especially as I'm in the middle of this campaign. So Danielle, you could not have found a better scripture to encourage me with this morning. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome.
Speaking of which, John, speaking of your race and your activism, not just in this race, but your activism on a broader level. I know that I've seen you down at the legislature during the session, driving over from St. Tammany over to testify on very important items of legislation. So really, you've put your money where your mouth is. What is it that made you make the decision to run for this particular seat, to run for the legislature?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And as you and Danielle know, I've been at the legislature many, many times, not only this year, but in years past. Helped to pass some great bills. And when I say help to pass, that means just testify on bills, and often I'm asked by either senators or state reps or other organizations to go up and speak on behalf of good Christian conservative legislation. And I'm happy to do it. And very often, sadly, I'm very often the only person there standing for that side. And I don't know if other people can go and have the same impetus to speak. And I know speaking in front of people, especially a committee, is a very difficult thing, but I love doing that because I think it really does move the needle at the end of the day. And in this situation, I've been involved with the Republican Parish Executive Committee for going on 8 years now, also on the Republican State Central Committee. And as a local pastor, a school headmaster, and a Christian radio station owner, I'm very involved as a community leader in moving the kingdom of God forward and working in local politics. And so when my friend Paul Hollis, who's been the state rep for 12 years, came up to his term limits and he wasn't going to be able to run again, that left an open seat. And I've been so active in that I felt like I would be probably the best candidate to step up into that spot to hold it down for Christian conservative principles. So we decided to, throw our hat in the ring and go for it.
John, as you survey the state, look at the issues that the state is facing now. What are the most urgent issues from your perspective?
Well, man, that's a long list, but one of the things that people are really concerned about is the fact that we have this huge outmigration of our best and brightest college graduates that can't find a good career level, high paying job to stay in Louisiana. And so they go to Texas or Florida or North Carolina. I mean, we have all seen some of our friends move out. And so we need to make sure that Louisiana is a state that brings to the table those great opportunities for our young people to stay. And one of the ways to do that is, of course, to make Louisiana business friendly. We need to be attractive. We need to be bringing people in here to start their businesses and build the businesses that we currently have. And I could go on about the outdated tax structure and how we need to change that. I would like to phase out the state income taxes. And you say, well, you can't do that. Where's the money going to come from? Well, look at some of these other states that have done that very thing, and they're thriving in their business community. So we just have to make some good, smart financial decisions. And if I couldn't stop this list without talking about education. When companies want to move to an area, they want to know what their recruitment base is. Are we highly educated? Do we have the type of communities that they can draw from to help their companies grow? And we really need to focus on education. Another thing would be crime. We have to reduce crime. We have some of the most dangerous cities not only in the state, but in the country, right here in Louisiana. But so we need to make sure that we can do some things to reduce crime and at the same time not clog up our courtrooms. So again, a lot of difficult decisions need to be made, but I guess these are just a few things that pop off the top of my head, Chris, about that.
Yeah. And John, I know you have knocked more doors than most people running for any office in this state. So when you're talking to potential constituents, what are you hearing is at stake in your district? What are they most concerned about?
Well, really, Danielle, many of the same things that I've just mentioned are some of the things that are the talking points at the doors. And I don't even have to bring these things up. It's not like I go to the door, knock on the door, and have a pitch. I mean, I go to the door to meet somebody and let them know that I'm running and tell them a little bit about myself. But then I ask them, what's important to them? What are some of the major things that they see need to be worked on? And that this is what they tell me. And with the insurance crisis, it's like, well, what can you do to bring my insurance rates down? My neighbor just moved to Mississippi because they couldn't afford their insurance, things like that. And it's, people are in dire need of some major changes, and it's going to take some tough decisions. We just busted the $50 billion spending cap. I mean, what was that about? We're spending money inappropriately, and at the same time, we're complaining that we don't have enough money. So when I was a financial planner for over a decade, before I went into full-time ministry, this was a long time ago, but, we had to go in and I'd have to sit down with a client or a small business or a family, and I'd have to assess their financial situation. We'd find the weak points, would identify their limited resources, then we'd have to restructure strategies and their goals and supply the services necessary to reach their short-term and long-term goals. And the same thing has to be done at the state level. We need to have accountability. We need to have transparency, and we need to make some tough decisions. And I think one of the things in our state is so many things have been misspent through the years that it's going to take some hard decisions to go in and say, listen, we're not going to be able to do this anymore. We're going to have to stop that. And we might have to start this. And those are all kinds of difficult decisions, and you just can't make those emotionally. So that's one thing I think that affects a lot of people. And one of the things too, if I can say it just very, blatantly, people don't like the direction that the country's going from a liberal standpoint. I mean, the current presidential administration, the Democratic Party, and what they're pushing, a lot of people in Louisiana, and you guys know this, we call them blue dog Democrats or Southern Democrats. My mom was a Democrat. She's 86 years old, right? She's never voted Democrat in, 30 in more than 30 years. But at the same time, she registered Democrat because you had to in order to vote in the primary back in the day. And so a lot of people, even if they are registered Democrat, they really think Republican because the Democrat Party left their people a long time ago. And they're really scared about the direction of our country from a liberal standpoint. And they say, look, we don't want any of this stuff, whether it's the transgender issue, whether it's the mask mandate issue, whether it's all of these things. They're very afraid that if this stuff continues, we won't have a country much longer.
And I can tell you, John, from my own personal experience, you're not just sitting here on our podcast talking about these things. You have actually devoted countless hours at the legislature testifying for very important legislation related to these issues and opposing bad legislation related to these issues. I've had the privilege of testifying alongside you on a number of occasions at the legislature. So I think it's very important for our listeners to understand that you're not just talking here to sound good. You actually have walked the walk and continue to walk the walk. In fact, I think that's where I met you at the legislature when you were down there testifying in favor of Representative Horton's legislation that would prohibit some of these radical sexual concepts from being introduced to our children in the public schools. I was very, very gratified to have met you there and appreciate your testimony on those important issues.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, and it was always great to see you guys there. And you have a great contingency of people that fight on a daily basis up there to make sure that we support the right things and oppose the wrong things. One particular bill, and by the way, if the listeners want to go to my website, it's very easy to remember. It's www.johnraymond.com. But you can see some of the videos that the legislature takes of me speaking. One bill that was very important was to stop the transgenderism from being a protected class in the hiring process. And, some people thought I was being judgmental on that, but the truth is that I said that the economic engine of our state is the small businesses, and a small business owner has to be able to choose who represents their company, their brand, who interacts with their customers and their client base. You look no further than Anheuser-Busch, who lost, $7+ billion. Or is that how much it was? It was amazing. It was crazy how much they lost in market cap because they forgot who their customer base was. And it was amazing the Democrats that came out and hit me hard. One of them said, well, Pastor John, I can't believe you're a pastor and you're being so judgmental. I said, look, ma'am, it's not about being judgmental. If somebody wants to go get a job somewhere, they can. But the small business owner has to be able to direct their business. They're the one risking the money, the time, the effort. They have everything on the line. We can't force them to hire somebody that they know is going to destroy their company. It makes no sense. And another bill that I helped speak on was Senate Bill 63 with Senator Beth Mizell. And that was to make sure that churches were in a protected class from being unfairly closed during pandemics, because we were the first to be closed and the last to open. At least now we'll be the last to close and the first to open. So we have a constitutional freedom of assembly and worship, and that has to be recognized even in the most difficult of times. And many other bills like this, I think there were 9 or 10 bills that I either helped to pass or help oppose in this legislative session alone. And I love doing that. And like you said, I'm not running for this office, Chris, because I need another job. I'm running because I'm already doing the job, and I'm doing it well, for free, as a community leader. And I think I could do it much more effectively if I was in the legislature.
And to clarify on a couple of the bills that you just mentioned, one in particular, a very nefarious piece of legislation brought by a Democrat in the legislature that would have, as you said, expanded the class of protected individuals in hiring to include transgenders. And that was a really dangerous piece of legislation for all the reasons that you just mentioned, because it would take the ability of an employer, his power and his authority to determine who is best suited to work in a particular industry, his company, who is best suited and best qualified to move the company forward. And it would have created, this bill would have created a presumption in favor of discrimination that would have exposed businesses across the state to frivolous lawsuits at great personal cost to themselves. Fortunately, your testimony was instrumental in defeating that legislation, and I was there and I saw it. And just another example, in my view, of the fact that you put your money where your mouth is in helping the citizens of Louisiana.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. I love doing it. And I hope that the voters will see the opportunity to send another good conservative legislator to Baton Rouge, because that's really what we need, because we're in perilous times right now. If we don't hold the line right now, guys, people are scared, and rightfully so. We need to dig our heels and say, listen, no more. We're done. We need to stop this insanity. And that's why organizations like yours and all of your listeners and members are so important.
Exactly, John. And I couldn't have said it better myself. And when you're talking about the insanity that seems to be creeping back up, we have heard probably a little bit more than rumors that there's a new COVID variant and they want to mask people on planes again. We saw that Dillard University is already requiring their students to be masked. We've seen that the Biden administration is already charging the pharma companies with coming up with a vaccine. So in terms of that insanity, where do you fall, both as a citizen, what's your response to this kind of new COVID scare? And then as an elected official, what would your position be if you were facing federal mandates or if the governor was trying to lock us down again?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danielle. What a very important thing. And that brings me back to one of the things that I've heard many times on the campaign trail, just talking to people. This mask stuff is crazy. I was talking to one nurse last week, and the COVID conversation came up, and she literally laughed at the mask idea. She goes, listen, she goes, I have to get masked for, a few different things that she explained. She goes, these little pieces of cloth or whatever that they put on your face, they do absolutely nothing. I mean, she's very skilled in this, very trained in this. She goes, these are worthless. They're absolutely worthless. So I think it's a social experiment. I think the liberals want to know how far they can push us and will acquiesce to their, the insanity and their bullying. But, we started a school here, and we've got a couple hundred students. And when the COVID thing came around, we asked the parents what their thoughts were, and some of them were not okay with the mask. Some of them were not okay with the mask. And so what we did is we created a waiver, and we said, listen, if you want your child to wear a mask, then they can wear a mask. If you don't want your child to wear a mask, then just sign this waiver saying that you release us from any liability, and due to the HIPAA laws and the privacies and whatever medical issues that you care about in your family, you have chosen to not have your child wear a mask. And so pretty much 95% of the people signed that waiver and didn't want their children wearing a mask. I think out of a couple hundred kids, we might have had, literally, you could probably count on one hand the ones that would wear a mask. And our teachers wouldn't wear masks unless they were like right up in front of the kids, and they would wear the face shield, not the mask. But it was something that we did to have reasonable precautions. But it was because we wanted to take great care in making sure we erred on the side of caution. But when it came to the mandates, it is very much an overreach, I believe, for the government to say you have to do this or you have to do that. Even if it's taking the vaccines, you have to, you don't have to. In fact, as a pastor of a church, I had a number of members come up and say that they were going to lose their job if they didn't have a religious exemption to the vaccine. And so I did some study, and I made sure I came up with something that I thought was very medically appropriate, spiritually appropriate, biblically, constitutionally. And I blended a lot of that together and came up with a really good 2-page letter on the religious exemption. And so I gave it to the members that asked for it. Every one of them came back and said it worked. And most of them said that they had a friend that wanted another one. Long story short, guys, I ended up putting that online on my Facebook. And I said, if you need one of these, you send it to me, because it needed to be signed by a pastor. I said, you send it to me and I'll sign it. And so literally hundreds of people did that. Then I just put my signature on it and said, look, y'all just download it. I had people calling me saying that letter saved hundreds of jobs in like one hospital system alone in Houston and other things. And so I know that saved thousands and thousands of jobs ultimately. So I guess to bottom line it all, I would say that anytime the government tells you you have to wear a mask, you have to get a shot, you have to do these things, you have to shut your business down, that is not constitutional. And we need to stand strong on that. If we want to give people options, listen, if you want a vaccine, take one. If you want to wear a mask, take it. But to require your employees to do so, or to force citizens to do so, I think is absolutely an unconstitutional thing.
And John, I couldn't agree with you more, first of all. And secondly, my position has always been exactly what yours is regarding the freedom of choice. I will protect and guard just as zealously a person's right to wear a mask, or right to get a vaccine, or right to stay home if they're afraid of a virus or a variant, as I will fight for people's right to decline from those things. We live in a country in which people have the freedom to choose. It's unfortunate that on the left side of things, it seems as though we have the freedom to choose only as long as we're choosing what they want us to choose. But if we choose anything different, then it's wrong and we're subject to those mandates. But it's good to hear you commit to standing strong against that in the event that there is another wave coming at us regarding all these mandates, which we've heard. Let me shift gears for just a second here, John. I want to ask you how your race is going. How are things moving along out there? And what is your perception about the complexion of things on the campaign trail generally?
I think it's going very well. I've knocked on more doors than I can count, thousands. And, I'm getting a great response at the doors. People believe in what we're talking about. And we've got just hundreds and hundreds of yard signs out there. And, they say signs don't vote, and that's true, but yard signs do, because somebody who puts a sign in their yard with your name on it is saying, I endorse this person and I'm going to get out and vote for them. And so while a big 4x8 highway sign might not do much except name recognition, a yard sign says you got somebody behind you. And so we're just getting amazing responses from people. So I'm very excited about it. We've taken a little bit of flack. I've got a situation where I've got some false charges that are still pending. I've got a court date on December 11th to resolve some issues where in the school that I started, we had 5 boys, teenagers that were bullying a teacher and talking incessantly. They'd done it for the whole year. 7th graders. I don't know if you've ever raised a 7th grader. But anyway, so this teacher's bawling her eyes out, about ready to quit. And so I was called in as the disciplinarian to mitigate that situation. And I saw the boys that were involved. I knew who they were. They'd been in trouble very often throughout the year. And we talked to them many times. And they were literally ganging up on the teacher. She'd tell them to stop, and she'd turn around and start talking again and laughing and different things like that. And it was just very upsetting to her. And she was literally about to walk out of the door. And it's hard to find good teachers these days. And we have a no bullying policy at our school. And so the principal had pulled the students out, and I didn't want to expel them. I didn't want to suspend them because we were in our last testing period, and I knew what would happen. If I suspended them, if I expelled them, which I certainly could have, they'd have failed the 7th grade. If I suspended them, they could have probably failed the 7th grade. And when they came back, they would have caused other kids to be held up because they'd be asking questions that they missed. And so I didn't want them to go home. But I said, look, you got a choice. You can either call your parents right now and you can be suspended, or you can have tape put on your mouth and you learn how to be quiet in class. Well, Chris, guess what they all chose?
They chose the tape.
Of course they did. They'll get the tape. So
I certainly wouldn't want to call my mom or my dad. I tell you that.
No, I'll tell you this. My dad's a U.S. Marine. It would have taken me about 3 seconds to choose the tape.
And so they had tape on over their mouth, earlobe to earlobe, for less than 10 minutes. It didn't never caused any discomfort, wasn't painful, didn't stop their breathing, anything like that. It was just an object lesson that they needed to learn to understand you're not going to control the class. Let me tell you, somebody could say, well, why didn't you get them the right lines? Why didn't you get them to have a reflection or detention? Hey, we've tried all that. Let, Holding hands with these boys singing Kumbaya wasn't going to cut it. They needed to understand that, listen, you cannot destroy your teacher and the other students with your disrespectfulness. And so that's what happened. Well, anyway, it seemed to be a good lesson that everybody learned. Okay, no harm, no foul, right? Well, then 3 of the parents decided to sue the school. And 2 of them, I spoke to those parents, and they were like, yeah, cool, we get it, we understand, and so that wasn't a problem. Those 2 boys are still attending the school and won our 8th grade basketball championship and doing fine. But the other 3 decided to sue the school because they saw a money grab opportunity. And so they had to justify that with a police report. And so they all stormed the castle at the police station and got a police officer who didn't know the law to file an arrest warrant. And so I was arrested, and it's just crazy. It's ludicrous. No child was ever mistreated at Lakeside Christian Academy. No child was ever hurt at Lakeside Christian Academy. No law was ever broken. And yet this is the kind of cancel culture situation that we have to deal with when you try to do the right thing, because it was out of love for the kids, out of respect for them. And so anyway, I got to deal with that. And that comes up on occasion, but very rarely. And in fact, every single time, and I can count it on one hand, after thousands of doors I've knocked on, I could count on one hand the times that have come up. And when it came up, every single time the conversation ended with the person saying, put your yard sign anywhere you want it. So people understand that this is a money grab and nothing else.
And so they somehow were able to manufacture some criminal charges against you on this, which are pending now. But it sounds to me as though you've got an excellent defense to this. And to be honest with you, as I said earlier, I would have chosen the tape very, very quickly if I had been given the alternative. And I think it's important to point out here, John, that with regard to the way that you responded to this situation with the tape, that this was not the first rodeo with these young boys, that you had tried other alternatives, you were trying, it sounds to me, to avoid kicking them out of school, which would have really set them back in the long term far more than the action that you chose.
That's right. Well, and these were 13-year-old 7th graders. They're at a point where if they would have failed the 7th grade, this could have affected the rest of their high school. It could have put a kink in their future. And I'm like, I love these young men. I didn't want that to happen. And so I gave them an option. And, in hindsight, in this very litigious and overly sensitive environment we lived in, I should have probably just gone on and suspended them,
And you probably could have been, sued for that. So I think there's a lot of parents who respect this choice, and a lot of parents who would want to see their kids properly disciplined at school if they're at work and unable to do it. So I remember when we were growing up, your parents had to sign a corporal punishment release saying that if you misbehaved, the principal could spank you.
Yeah.
And I guess, and I'll tell you what, my parents all signed that for all 3 of us.
I bet they did. But of course, you never got spanked, Danielle. You know that.
That's right.
Well, that's true.
I did. Mr. Brown in Springfield High School, he would say 3 licks or 3 days, 3 licks or 3 days. Well, everybody would say 3 licks, 3 licks. And then what's funny, Chris, is he would say fast or slow, son, fast or slow. He would say, fast, pop, 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 get it over with.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, John, I'll say this about that situation that you're facing. There are some candidates out there, weaker-minded men, who would probably look at a situation like this and say, okay, I know they're probably going to attack me on this, as ridiculous as it is. They're going to make it sound like it's far, far worse than it is. So maybe I just avoid this. Maybe I just don't run for office, and maybe I just avoid the headache. But you're not doing that. You are standing up and moving forward because you recognize that our state has great, great needs, and you're simply not going to back down based upon a frivolous accusation. And like I told another candidate that we had on recently who's facing some similar things. Far from making me personally, and I would suspect our listeners, less inclined to support you because of this, it actually makes me more inclined to support you because it is direct evidence of your ability to stand up and to fight back and to move forward to victory despite the obstacles. And that to me is reflective of the kind of legislator that you will be. So I'm more inclined to support you because of this, certainly not less.
Hey, Chris, thanks. And listen, while we're out, all Abraham Lincoln honest, full disclosure here, one of the things that happened is that I had an interview with, I don't know if you probably don't know Walton and Johnson. They're like 9 states. They're prolific in the Southeast. But have you guys ever heard of those guys or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I have.
So I had a couple of people that called me and said, "Hey, Pastor, you're on Walton and Johnson." And I said, "What do you mean I'm on Walton and Johnson?" They said, "They're talking about you and the boys and the tape." And I said, "Really?" And so I called in the show, and I own a radio station, but I don't listen to other radio stations a lot, so I didn't even know who they were. And they said, "Okay, well, everyone, we have Pastor John Raymond on the phone from Slidell, Louisiana, who we just talked about, and he's here, so we would like to ask him some questions." And so they started asking me some questions. And when I went in, I had to get fingerprinted. I had to put a striped uniform on. I had to get a mug shot done. It was very interesting of an experience. Of course, I'm in good company, with between Jesus, Donald Trump, and me, all of us have been arrested.
You better believe it.
And so, but at the same time, I'm like, okay. And what I did is I said, listen, I am not going to give the liberal media the opportunity to see me in a frowning mugshot. Not going to do it. And so when I went in there, they said, you got to stand in front of here and get your picture taken. And so I walked in front of the little camera, and then I looked down, and when I looked up, I was smiling. And I did not stop smiling until I walked away, because I wasn't going to let them get a shot of me looking like some kind of a, ugly, abusive, whatever. And so it's, and I've been, of course, chastised for smiling in the mugshot. Well, what was my other option? Frown?
Right.
And so,
what a great touch. What a great stroke there. And what a great and very appropriate act of defiance, which I absolutely love.
Thanks. Well, they did too. And he said, one of the hosts said, as soon as I saw your mugshot, I said, this guy didn't do anything wrong. I said, he's in there, and this is a hoax. This is something happened. And so then I started telling them about the situation. When I said that I gave the boys a choice, I say boys, they're young men, they're 13 years old. But I said, when I gave them a choice, he said, wait, stop. He said, you gave them a choice? I said, yeah, they could have called their parents and been suspended. And he started laughing out loud. And he said, this is crazy. He goes, I can't believe you've been arrested. I said, yeah, the whole arrest was a joke. I said, it shouldn't happen. I said, in fact, the law clearly states that in a disciplinary situation, if you're a policeman, a parent, or a school teacher, a disciplinarian, you are exempt from this specific action, because if you're in a reasonable disciplinary situation with a child. I said, the cop didn't even read the law. Well, the police then got very offended because they heard the show, and I'm sure it went all over the chief, by the way. And so they're, okay, well, we got to get this guy. So then they called an organization down here called Concerned Citizens of St. Tammany. They're kind of a hit group on social media. They look for anything that they could get a salacious headline about to attack anybody on it. They really do. And they've done some good stuff, to be honest, but at the same time, they go overboard for the headlines. Well, the police contacted them and said, listen, can you find anything to hit John Raymond on? Because basically they were upset that I laughed at him on Walton and Johnson. And so this was a personal hit then that they were offended by. And so this organization put out on their Facebook, if anybody has anything negative about Pastor John, he's done these bad things, where there's smoke, there's fire. And they recently, a year ago or two, a few years ago, I guess, they arrested and convicted a former sheriff for some inappropriate sexual behavior and whatever. So I guess they thought, here's another high profile person that they're gonna hit for doing wrong. And they attacked me salaciously. And so I had 3 former employees that I had to fire 6 years ago, get together. And one of them, their husband we just filed a protective order on him for trying to destroy our church school ministry on social media and sending salacious and vile texts to me and my daughter and other things. So we just had a protective order put against him by the court. Well, his wife and two of her friends who were former workers called the police and said that I abused a child years ago, 6 years ago, and that I held him upside down and spanked him and suffocated him. And it was like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. So they jumped on the bandwagon. And so then the police, applauded the opportunity to come arrest me again. And I was like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. And of course, I've never mistreated a child. I've never held a kid up and spanked him. I've never suffocated a child. But what they're talking about is we had a little boy that his mom was on drugs. The lady was trying to adopt him to get him out of that situation. And he was a very violent young man. He was 4 years old. And he would throw tantrums and he would bang his head on the tile floor. You would think his head was going to bust open. He would scream, not only stopping the education in that class, but in classes surrounding. It was just terrible, terrible. And we shouldn't have kept him, but we wanted to help her save him from that bad situation. So we kept doing everything we could. And one day he was throwing a terrible tantrum in the principal's office. So as the disciplinarian, I went in to try to help the situation out. And so I sat down on the floor with him, held him in my arms, told him I loved him, told him to stop. Hey, look, he can't be doing this. Just relax. Everything's going to be fine. Well, and I guess he had a cold or whatever. Snot's coming from his nose. So I'm reaching up, getting tissue, asking a lady for tissues, one of our workers, and I'd wipe snot from his nose and I'd hold him and I'd kind of restrain him because he'd be flailing around. Anyway, after a little while, he gets exhausted. He relaxes. He lays his head on my chest. Everything's fine. He rests for a little while. Then he's okay. Then he goes back to class. Okay. I did everything as a loving, gentle father or grandfather would have done it. Okay. To help this kid not hurt himself or others if he'd have pulled a lamp off the desk and hit himself in the head, I'd have been sued for that, So I had to contain the situation, but I did it in a loving way. Well, they're saying that when I was wiping snot from his nose, I was literally holding him down and suffocating him. And then one of the workers said that he went limp and she thought he was dead. I didn't suffocate him and he went limp. He relaxed because he knew it was over and he was exhausted and he was in a safe place and he rested in my arms. So they literally created this horrific fabrication of what I did as a loving person who loves that kid, and they turned it into something terrible. And then the cops, just to let you know how devious they were, in the interview with me and my attorney, they asked me about that situation. I explained it to him, and my attorney said, well, then that's prescribed, right? That's beyond the 4-year statute of limitations for cruelty to juveniles anyway. And the police response was this: well, that depends on what we charge him for.
Yeah, so you're talking
Wow.
so you're talking here about a situation that occurred years and years and years before, and this group puts out a publication. What can you find on John Raymond? What can you find on John Raymond? And these former disgruntled employees come forward with this nonsense. It's amazing how it's supposedly so bad that they never ever reported it for years and years and years until they had some incentive to do so when this group was trying to find bad. The whole thing strikes me as pitiful, absolutely pathetic that they would even be thinking about doing something like this, to you. But I'm glad that you had the opportunity to explain it because it just sounds ridiculous.
Well, let me say this too, Chris, because what they charged me for in order to have that arrest was second-degree cruelty to juveniles, because that has a 6-year statute of limitations. And so they could go back another 2 years if they ramped up the charge to a more serious charge of second degree. And if you look up second degree cruelty to juveniles in Louisiana, it means like protracted harm to like you break a bone, or they're mentally retarded now because you hit them in the head so much that they're mentally impaired and they can't think straight, or their bodily organs don't work. And so now they have kidney problems for the rest of their lives. I mean, second degree cruelty to juveniles, if you look it up, that's like close to murder. That's like the most horrific monster movie stuff you could think. And that's what they charged me for, just so that they could go back 6 years and pin another arrest on me. That's what the police did.
Yeah. It's amazing how when you stand up for things that matter, you try to make a difference, We're not always perfect in the way we approach things, but we do the very best we can to make a difference, to make the world a better place. And God knows the powerfully good influence you've had on so many people. And sometimes, unfortunately, when we're trying to do the work of God and do good, sometimes things like this happen to us. But as I said earlier, I know that it's all absurd, these criminal charges, and I admire the fact that you're continuing to move forward. And I believe that you're going to continue to move forward to victory.
Well, thank you, my friend. We had to make the difficult choice as a family. Do I walk into this candidacy with these 4 felonies hanging over my head like the sword of Damocles hanging from a horsehair? And they could what? And I said, look, guys, listen. I said, Daniel could have gone into his house and closed his windows when they passed the law that you couldn't pray, but he didn't. He left his windows open and he prayed 3 times a day like he always did. And he said, you know what? If you throw me in the lion's den, you throw me in the lion's den. But I believe God's going to sustain me. And that's the kind of leadership that I try to teach my children and my family. And so it was like, I'm not going to back down because of these false charges. I know I'm innocent. I've never done anything harmful to a child or vindictive or malicious or mean-spirited. I don't have anger issues. This is not the person that they're trying to paint me to be. So I said, look, I'm going to do what the Lord wants me to do. And if he gives me the victory, well, he gets the credit for the victory. And if he chooses to not give me that victory, well, the Lord still gets the victory, just a different way. But what I'm not going to do is let the cancel culture and the liberal media push me into such a corner and intimidate me to acquiesce and say, well, then I guess I'll just give up the fight. I'm kind of like Trump. I don't give up. I'm sorry. What I do out of the goodness of my heart. I do for the right reasons, and I'm going to move forward and take the hits as they come and give God the glory for the victory.
And what a powerful example you're setting in taking that approach. There are a lot of people out there, John, and Danielle knows this, who want to try to make a difference, who want to move forward, and they probably think daily about many things they could be doing, but they don't do it. They don't act, and usually it's because of fear. Fear of reprisal, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of humiliation. And you're setting a very powerful example that does not have to be our response. Our response can be one of bold faith where we move forward in courage each day. And that's what you're doing. And what an incredible pleasure to have you on the show today. Please keep us in the loop on how things are moving along. And on the evening of October 14th, we hope we will be celebrating a great victory with you.
Thank you so much, Chris. So
And John, just remind the listeners, where can they learn more about you? Tell us your website one more time.
JohnRaymond.com. JohnRaymond.com. It's got my cell number. You can call me on my cell. You can email me. If you know anybody in District 104, which is the Lacombe area, it goes from Slidell to Mandeville and Covington, that big area there. Let me know. So JohnRaymond.com will give you all the information. You can watch some videos of me in the legislature and also watch some music videos of songs that I wrote and produced a music video called I Pledge Allegiance that honors the American flag and veterans and first responders, and also a song called Thin Blue Line that honors the police. So you can check those and you can download those for free.
The good police. The good police.
These guys were misled a little bit, but I think for the most part, I'm all about funding the police. I mean, I love the law enforcement, and we have to soldier up and help those guys out. But but you can get those free downloads on my website at johnraymond.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, John.
God bless you, sir.
God bless you guys. Talk to you later.
Chris, it's amazing the persecution this guy's coming under.
It's very powerful to me to see someone face frivolous charges and stand strong and keep moving forward. I just admire that so much. And in a broader sense, Danielle, it seems like everybody who tries to do good, to stand for the truth, comes under persecution of one sort or another. And of course, the scripture promises us that I believe Jesus said that, you know what, you will come under persecution. You will have tribulation in this life, but remember that I'm with you and remember that I have overcome this world. And that's what we have to remember. And I just have a lot of respect for John for moving forward. And it sounds to me like he's getting a lot of good, positive reception on the trail.
Yes, I've spent a little bit of time with John and his wife, and they're just both very lovely, very honorable people. I was just so amazed when I met him about the passion he has for this race, the amount of work he's putting into it. This is a guy who really wants to win. He really wants to serve the people of District 104, and I think he's very well poised to do a fantastic job.
I do too. And I want to remind the listeners here that LeCag has a PAC associated with good constitutional conservative candidates. Want to encourage our listeners to donate to our PAC so that we can use those resources to do a number of things in order to help not only John, but other conservative candidates who are running for office across the state. This is a very, very critical time for us, this election cycle right here coming up in October. And if we have the resources to put toward these candidates who will serve us so faithfully, they're going to win. And we're going to change the legislature, and I think we're going to change the state. So I encourage our listeners to continue to donate to our PAC, the LeCag PAC. You can go on our website and do so, lecag.org, and let's move these candidates to victory.
Yes, absolutely. And if listeners would like to support the show, they can also do so by going to our website, which is freedomstate.us. If you're interested in advertising, you can email us at info@freedomstate.us. We'd love to talk to you and share some of the different ways that you can advertise with us. So I think, Chris, we are just doing the hard work. We keep on marching. We're just so excited about the possibilities of this election season. And I think that we have some real momentum here. We're going to be continuing the endorsement series right up through the election. So be looking for your candidate. If there's anybody like, for instance, John Raymond or Hollis Day, who you know people who live in their district, please send the show to them. Let them hear directly from the candidate, because we want to make sure that we give as much airtime to Louisiana first, America first, God-fearing patriots as we possibly can.
And we are revolutionizing the state of freedom. This podcast is revolutionizing the way political advocacy is done in Louisiana by providing a broader and broader platform for candidates and public officials who are standing for freedom to come on our show and have a broad platform across the state to get their message out. And it is only through your donations to the state of freedom, your sharing and your subscribing to our podcast, that we are able to continue to do that. From the bottom of our hearts, we are deeply thankful to all of our listeners, and with your help each day, we will continue moving forward to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Yes, we will. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.